Hi, and welcome back to the series of Either Or by Kierkegaard. This is Amreen from Reader Club. So let's jump right into it. The third chapter, Ancient Tragedies Reflection in the Modern. Now, I know that in my previous video I said that I will be talking about chapters 3 and 4 together, but then there's so much that each chapter has to offer. I mean, there's just so much ground to cover with each chapter, so I thought, why not dedicate one video to just a single chapter at a time. Okay, so chapter 3, Ancient Tragedies Reflection in the Modern. This essay begins with Kierkegaard comparing ancient tragedy with modern tragedy. It's sort of like a good introduction to the topic, where he says that however much the world has changed, the concept of the tragic nevertheless remains essentially unchanged, just as weeping still comes no less naturally to man. Now, just at the beginning of the essay, Kierkegaard has also mentioned Aristotle's principles of tragedy, and I didn't know what that was, so I checked online and found this whole summary and analysis of Aristotle's principles of tragedy. There are way too many essays/articles I found, and one that was particularly helpful and even easy to understand. I'm going to leave the link to that in the description, so you can find it there in case you want to know more. Alright, so moving on, he talks about the differences between the ancient tragic hero and his modern counterpart. But why is tragedy a topic of discussion here to begin with? I think it's because Kierkegaard's trying to differentiate between aesthetic guilt/suffering, since sorrow, guilt, suffering, and pain are all a part of tragedy, and ethical guilt and suffering. So you see how he's once again asserting the presence of these two realms of existence. According to him, there's the aesthetic sphere on one side, which consists of instant gratification, while the ethical mode of existence is more concerned with the absolute, the eternal. And you cannot live in either/or situation, because according to him, our consciousness, the thing we call self, is comprised of both finite possibilities and infinitude. And that's what this book is all about, of course. So the heart of the discussion presented in chapter 3 between the ancient tragic hero and the modern tragic hero is, to what extent is the individual character responsible for bringing about the tragedy upon himself. The ancient perspective, in simple words, as far as I understood it, states that what happens in one's life is a result of not only your decisions, intentions, and actions, meaning your will, but also an accumulative outcome of external determinants like family, fate, things you cannot possibly control. And then there's the modern tragic hero, whose actions and life are not controlled by any such substantial metaphysical forces, because modernity embraces the concept of individuality. So it sort of creates a world where an individual is free and independent, hence wholly responsible for how his life unfolds and for his suffering. Likewise, I think the same distinction can be made for the role of guilt in ancient tragedy and modern tragedy. Hence, once again, you have the aesthetic perspective on the concepts of guilt and sin, and on the other side, the ethical or religious take on remorse, and then the salvation of the sinner. He then goes on to talk about the part that sorrow plays in ancient tragedy and modern tragedy. He says that sorrow is deeper and pain is less in ancient tragedy, while pain is greater and sorrow less profound in modern tragedy, because here the conception of guilt is more clear. So Kierkegaard has very clearly and even simply explained how deep sorrow in Greek ancient tragedy is associated with consciousness, and he explains this from a psychological standpoint, which is very interesting. So there's a lot of that going on here, that being tragic sorrow, tragic pain, tragic guilt, suffering, action, how they're all a part of this huge stage of tragedy. You know, if you read this chapter with undivided attention and focus, you're most likely going to grab at least the essence of what he's trying to convey, which at its best is more than enough, believe me. And then he talks about anxiety as well. Of course, it's Kierkegaard, he is going to talk about anxiety. So he writes, anxiety, furthermore, always involves a reflection upon time, for I cannot be anxious about the present, only about the past or the future. But the past and the future, holding on to each other so tightly that the present vanishes, are reflective phenomena. Then there's the whole sort of Kierkegaardian analysis of the Oedipus tragedy. Now, I'm not going to get into that in detail here, since the topic is quite vast and multi-layered, but I am going to mention that what Kierkegaard has done here, he's outlined the definition of a true tragic personality through the unhappy story and character of Antigone, who's the daughter of Oedipus. Through her example, he reiterates how ancient tragedy, which is rooted in deep, deep sorrow caused by both internal and external factors, must be reflected in modern tragedy. Now, just to conclude this chapter, I'm going to read a few excerpts from the book that I found, specifically from chapter 3, that I found quite hard-hitting. Well, all of Kierkegaard's work is hard-hitting, but I can't read all of it here now, can I? So anyway, here it goes. The first one is, our age certainly has one peculiarity to a greater degree than Greece, namely that it is more melancholy and hence deeper in despair. Our age is thus melancholy enough to realize there is something called responsibility and that it has some significance. And here's another one. Tragic guilt is more than just subjective guilt. It is inherited guilt. But inherited guilt, like original sin, is a substantial category, and it is just this substantiality that makes the sorrow deeper. So that's about it. And yeah, I forgot to mention at the beginning of the video that this chapter, this essay, Kierkegaard has addressed to members of the living dead. It's a loose translation of the underlined word. All right, thank you so much for listening. I hope this video provides some context in terms of better understanding the chapter and the overall theme of Kierkegaard's Either Or. I've read the next chapter already, which is chapter 4, so hope to make a whole video on that one soon. Thank you for watching and listening. I'll see you soon.